Historically, legislation concerning dogs was primarily focused on human interests. Early laws, such as Michigan's 1919 Act, centered on licensing to establish ownership and on protecting valuable livestock from canine predation. In this legal paradigm, the dog was the object of the law, a piece of property whose actions needed to be controlled to prevent economic loss to others. A pivotal moment in the United States came with the passage of the Animal Welfare Act, AWA, in 1966. Initially conceived to prevent the theft of pets for sale to research laboratories, the AWA introduced the revolutionary concept of humane care and handling into federal law. For the first time on a national scale, the dog's experience became a subject of legislative concern. Subsequent amendments, such as those prohibiting the barbaric practice of dogfighting, further solidified this shift, signaling a societal consensus against overt cruelty and the exploitation of animals for violent entertainment. A persistent rumor circulates online, suggesting that in parts of Arkansas, it is illegal for a dog to bark after 6 p.m. This notion, while appealing in its simplicity, is a classic example of internet myth-making that distorts a more ambiguous legal reality. An examination of actual municipal codes in the state reveals no such time-specific curfew. Instead, Arkansas cities rely on the broad and highly subjective legal standard of nuisance. In Rogers, for instance, city ordinances hold an owner responsible for preventing excessive noises or unreasonably loud, disturbing, and unnecessary noises that become a nuisance to the community. Similarly, the code in North Little Rock identifies excessive dog barking as a frequent complaint and places the onus on the owner to prevent it from disturbing neighbors, but again, without any mention of a 6 p.m. deadline. Ordinances in Little Rock follow the same pattern, focusing on general animal control principles like licensing and confinement rather than time-based vocal restrictions. Ordinances in Little Rock follow the same pattern, focusing on general animal control principles like licensing and confinement rather than time-based vocal restrictions. The discrepancy between the myth and the legal reality highlights a fundamental challenge for both law enforcement and residents. What one person considers excessive, another may view as normal canine behavior. This subjectivity makes consistent enforcement nearly impossible and often escalates simple annoyances into protracted neighborhood disputes. The popularity of the 6 p.m. myth likely stems from a collective desire for a clear, black-and-white rule in a situation governed by shades of gray. The legal reality is far messier, reflecting the inherent difficulty of legislating neighborly conduct and the limits of the law in resolving interpersonal conflicts. In stark contrast to the vague standards of Arkansas, some jurisdictions in Illinois have attempted to solve the subjectivity problem by creating objective, time-based rules for nuisance barking. This legislative approach represents a significant evolution, moving from a conflict-based model to one that strives for evidence-based enforcement. A prime example is found in Will County, where Ordinance Section 90.18 is remarkably precise. It makes it unlawful for a dog to bark continuously for more than 15 consecutive minutes between the hours of 7 a.m. and 10 p.m., or for more than 10 consecutive minutes overnight. This transforms the core question from, was it annoying, to, did it last for 16 minutes at 3 p.m.? A query that can be answered with a stopwatch rather than an argument. What makes this model particularly advanced are its strict evidentiary requirements. To be valid, a complaint must be accompanied by audio or video evidence, be corroborated by at least 2 different households, or be personally witnessed by an animal control or law enforcement officer. This structure is a legal innovation designed to protect dog owners from a single vindictive neighbor while simultaneously forcing complainants to provide concrete proof. It shifts the burden away from requiring an officer to be present at the exact moment of the infraction. This is not an isolated legal quirk. Other Illinois communities, including Chatham and Northbrook, have adopted similar 15-minute rules, indicating a regional trend in legal drafting. By quantifying the offense, these Illinois laws attempt to remove the emotional he-said-she-said dynamic from neighborhood disputes, treating nuisance barking less like a personal squabble and more like a traffic violation with clear, measurable, and prosecutable parameters. Beyond the realm of noise, Illinois municipalities also regulate another sensory impact of pet ownership: offensive odors. While less dramatic than a barking dispute, these ordinances underscore the legal classification of animal keeping as an activity with potential public health consequences, akin to regulations on waste management or sanitation. The city of Galesburg's code, for example, explicitly prohibits keeping any animal in a manner that causes inconvenience or disturbance to other persons by reason of odor. The Village of Chatham's ordinance is even more specific, declaring any pen, yard, or structure to be a nuisance if associated debris or odors are unreasonably offensive to persons residing in the vicinity. These regulations are often embedded within broader public nuisance and sanitation codes, legally framing the byproducts of pet ownership, waste, soiled bedding, and accumulated debris as a public concern rather than a purely private matter. Unlike the time-based barking laws, the standard for odor remains subjective. However, its formal inclusion in the legal code is significant. It affirms that the right to own a pet is conditional. That right ends where it begins to negatively impact the health, safety, and peaceful enjoyment of the surrounding community, whether through sound waves or scent molecules. Perhaps no law better exemplifies the proactive approach to animal welfare than the one enacted in Turin, Italy. In 2005, the city passed a groundbreaking ordinance requiring dog owners to walk their dogs a minimum of 3 times per day. Failure to comply can result in a substantial fine of €500. This rule is the centerpiece of a nearly 20-page pet rulebook that also bans cosmetic alterations like fur dyeing and tail docking, with one local paper noting the regulations were designed to make it illegal to turn one's dog into a ridiculous fluffy toy. The city of Rome has a similar, though less demanding, 1 walk per day requirement. This legislation marks a fundamental shift in legal philosophy. Most animal laws are proscriptive. They tell owners what they must not do. The Turin law is proscriptive. It dictates what an owner must do. It moves the law's focus from preventing a public nuisance to ensuring an animal's private well-being. It is a direct legislative rejection of the pet as accessory mindset, codifying a dog's need for exercise and stimulation as a legal right. However, the law also showcases the immense gap that can exist between legislative ambition and enforcement reality. With no way to monitor every owner, police must rely on tips from wary neighbors. Anecdotal reports suggest the law is widely ignored, with residents expressing more frustration over common problems like unscooped waste. The challenge is clear. How can such a rule be enforced without grossly invading someone's privacy? While its day-to-day enforcement may be questionable, the Turin law remains a powerful statement of values. It signals a profound cultural and legal commitment to the idea that animal welfare is not just about preventing cruelty, but about actively providing a good life. Often misunderstood in the West as a purely authoritarian measure, the one-dog policy implemented in major Chinese cities is, at its core, a direct and severe response to a deadly public health crisis. The policy was first enacted in Beijing in 2006, at a time when rabies was the leading cause of death from infectious disease in the country. In 2004 alone, rabies claimed 2,651 lives, and with canine vaccination rates languishing at a mere 3%, the government took drastic action. The Beijing rules are strict, limiting each household to a single dog and banning breeds considered large, over 35 centimeters in height, or ferocious. Enforcement has at times been severe, with hefty fines and periodic culls of unregistered dogs that have sparked public protests. In 2011, Shanghai implemented a similar one dog per household rule, but with a crucial difference: it contains no size restriction. This distinction shows that the policy is not a monolithic national mandate, but is adapted at the municipal level. It has allowed for a more permissive pet culture to flourish in the cosmopolitan hub of Shanghai, where a cafe featuring large Siberian Huskies can operate legally. The policy exists within a complex cultural context. During the Mao era, pet ownership was often scorned as a bourgeois indulgence, and dogs were viewed in utilitarian terms. The recent explosion of pet ownership, driven by a rising middle class, represents a significant cultural shift. The one-dog policy is therefore a fascinating case study of a top-down, public health-driven law clashing with a bottom-up cultural and economic movement. It is a microcosm of the tensions in modern China, where collectivist state control grapples with emerging individualist consumer desires. The notion that Sweden grants dogs a legal right to a view is a romanticized misinterpretation, but the reality behind the myth is even more profound. The actual law is a single line in a vast and comprehensive animal welfare framework that is among the most rigorous in the world. The Swedish Board of Agriculture's regulations mandate that any indoor space where a dog is kept must have a window to let in natural light. This seemingly small detail is a single data point within a holistic legal system that codifies an animal's right to a species-appropriate life. The Swedish model legislates the entire environment in which a dog lives. The regulations extend to mandating daily social contact with people or other animals, regular outdoor walks, specific indoor temperature ranges, 10 to 21 degrees Celsius, and strict limits on airborne pollutants like ammonia. The law also prohibits the use of shock collars and indoor tethering, and even details the requirements for outdoor enclosures, stipulating that they must include an elevated resting place to keep the dog off the cold or wet ground. This comprehensive system is actively enforced by county administrative boards, which conduct regular inspections and have the authority to levy fines or even seize animals from non-compliant owners. Unlike American laws that focus on nuisance abatement or Italian laws that mandate specific duties, the Swedish approach is environmental. It legally defines animal welfare not merely as the absence of cruelty, but as the active presence of positive conditions, physical, social, and psychological, that allow an animal to thrive and behave naturally. The window for natural light is not about a scenic view. It is one component of a legally mandated environment designed for total well-being. In 2022, Germany amended its Animal Welfare Dog Ordinance, Tierschutzhundeverordnance, sparking international headlines about a new Gassi-Gesetz, or dog-walking law. The story of this law is a compelling case study in the negotiation between welfare ideals and practical reality. Initial proposals, which were widely reported, suggested a rigid one-size-fits-all rule. Owners would be required to walk their adult dogs at least twice a day for a total of at least 1 hour. This simple, easily digestible mandate, however, faced significant and logical resistance. Critics pointed out that the exercise needs of a young, high-energy border collie are vastly different from those of an elderly, brachycephalic pug, for whom such a requirement could be inappropriate or even harmful. Recognizing this, lawmakers rejected the strict time-based mandate. The final version of the law that took effect is far more flexible. It requires that a dog be granted sufficient exercise in the open air and sufficient contact with its caregiver, but it leaves the precise duration and frequency to the owner's discretion, based on the individual dog's age, health, and breed. The ordinance also introduced other important welfare measures, including a near-total ban on keeping dogs tethered, stricter rules for breeders, and a requirement that puppies receive a minimum of 4 hours of human contact per day to ensure proper socialization. While the final law establishes a clear principle, a dog's right to adequate exercise and social interaction, its flexible nature creates an enforcement challenge, a fact acknowledged by German officials. It is difficult to police what is sufficient. The Doggy Gazette is therefore less a prescriptive command and more a legally codified best practice. It trusts the majority of owners to be responsible while providing authorities with a legal tool to intervene in clear-cut cases of neglect, such as a dog that is never allowed to leave a small apartment or kennel. Among the most widely cited weird laws in the United States is the claim that a Minnesota statute forbids cats from chasing dogs up telegraph poles. It is a humorous and memorable image, but it has no basis in reality. A comprehensive review of Minnesota's state animal laws and the ordinances of its various municipalities reveals no such provision. The actual laws governing pet interactions in Minnesota are far more mundane and align with standard animal control practices nationwide. The legal framework rests on 2 pillars: animals running at large. State law and local codes, from Coon Rapids to International Falls, make it unlawful for an owner to permit their dog or cat to run at large off their property without being under direct control, such as on a leash. Public nuisance. State statutes define a dog that habitually worries, chases, or molests persons as a public nuisance, with the focus squarely on protecting human safety and public peace. The origin of the cat-chasing dog myth is untraceable in the legal record and likely stems from novelty books or early internet lists that were repeated without verification. Its persistence, however, serves a useful purpose for this analysis. It highlights the public's fascination with the perceived absurdity of the law, while the reality it obscures is one of practical, uniform, and sensible regulation designed to prevent common problems like dog bites, traffic hazards, and property damage. Debunking the myth replaces a silly falsehood with a clear understanding of how animal control laws actually function. The laws and cultural norms surrounding dogs in Saudi Arabia present a fascinating and evolving picture, marked by a blend of traditional restrictions and modern shifts toward pet friendliness. Historically, Saudi Arabia has had some of the world's most restrictive rules regarding dogs. Public ban. Walking a dog in public has been considered illegal. In 2008, the religious police in Riyadh, the Commission for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice, banned the sale of dogs and cats and prohibited walking them in public. The official reason given was to curb the phenomenon of men using cats and dogs to make passes at women. Violators could have their pets confiscated. Similar bans were previously enacted in Mecca and Jeddah. Import restrictions. The country has strict import regulations. Legally, dogs can only be brought into Saudi Arabia if they are classified for specific purposes, such as hunting, guarding, or as service animals. Family pets, regardless of breed, must have their paperwork describe them as such. However, the situation is currently undergoing a significant cultural shift, leading to a landscape where old rules and new attitudes coexist. Growing pet culture. Despite the restrictions, pet ownership is becoming increasingly fashionable, especially among the upper class and expatriate communities. Dog-friendly cafes like The Barking Lot and dog parks now exist in major cities like Khobar and Riyadh. Residents report seeing dogs walked more frequently in public parks and neighborhoods, though this can still draw stares or complaints. Easing of public restrictions. In a major policy change in November 2023, Saudi transportation authorities announced that small pets are now allowed on public transport, like buses, trains, and boats, provided they're kept in a carrier. Legal status. Owning a dog is legal in Saudi Arabia, and there are no overarching legal restrictions on keeping them as pets, though local rules and building policies may apply. In essence, while Saudi Arabia has historically enforced strange and strict laws limiting the public presence and ownership of dogs, recent years have seen a rapid evolution. The legal framework for imports remains rigid, but the social reality on the ground is becoming progressively more accepting of dogs as companion animals. In a nation of devoted drivers and passionate pet owners, one law stands out for its clarity, common sense, and universal application. It is illegal in all Australian states and territories to drive a vehicle with an animal on your lap. Unlike many of the other laws examined, this one is not strange but eminently sensible, rooted in the unambiguous goal of road safety. The rationale is clear. An animal on a driver's lap can interfere with steering, block the view, or become a dangerous projectile in a collision. While the principle is universally agreed upon, the law provides a masterclass in legal federalism. The penalties for this single offense vary dramatically across the country, reflecting each state's unique legislative priorities and penalty structures. This divergence is fascinating. A driver in Western Australia might receive a minor fine, while a driver in the ACT could face a penalty more than 30 times higher for the exact same behavior. This demonstrates how laws are not created in a vacuum, but are products of their specific political and social environments. The Australian lapdog law is the inverse of the Minnesota myth. It is real, universally applied in principle, and its strangeness lies not in its existence, but in the legally significant variations of its enforcement. The question of whether it is illegal to dye a dog's fur in France reveals a complex legal landscape where several distinct but related laws can be easily confused. The short answer is that there is no explicit national law in France that prohibits a pet owner from cosmetically dyeing their own dog's fur. However, the full picture requires untangling laws concerning the fur trade, general cruelty, and cosmetic alterations. First, France has very strong laws against the commercial fur trade. As a member of the EU, it has been subject to a ban on the import and sale of cat and dog fur since 2008. More recently, France has moved to ban mink fur farming and has passed sweeping legislation to close its remaining fur farms. These laws are aimed at a specific industry that involves killing animals for their pelts. Second, the act of an owner dyeing their pet's fur falls into a different category. While there is no specific ban, the act could potentially be prosecuted under France's general anti-cruelty statutes if it caused the animal harm. Using toxic human hair dyes or causing chemical burns or a severe allergic reaction could be considered an illegal act of cruelty. Finally, the issue is related to the broader topic of non-therapeutic cosmetic alterations. Procedures like tail docking and ear cropping are illegal in France and most of Europe under the European Convention for the Protection of Pet Animals, which condemns medically unnecessary surgical mutilations. Dyeing, being non-surgical and temporary, occupies a different legal and ethical space. The confusion may also arise from laws elsewhere. Turin, Italy, for example, does explicitly ban dyeing pets' fur as part of its comprehensive welfare code. This distinction is critical. French law draws a line between regulating large-scale, inherently cruel industries, the fur trade, and regulating the private actions of individual owners. While animal advocates may argue that dyeing a pet's fur is speciest and undignified, the law has thus far focused on preventing tangible physical harm rather than legislating matters of taste or ethics. The journey through the world's peculiar dog laws, from the mythical to the mundane, reveals far more than a collection of legal trivia. These statutes, in their entirety, form a portrait of our evolving relationship with the animals we call companions. They reflect our anxieties, our aspirations, and the ongoing, often clumsy, negotiation between human desires and animal needs. Several key themes emerge from this investigation. First is the power of myth. The fictions of a 6 p.m. barking curfew in Arkansas or a cat and dog pole climbing ban in Minnesota are more memorable than the complex reality of nuisance ordinances and running-at-large statutes. These myths persist because they offer simple, if absurd, answers to the complicated questions of how we live together. Second, there is an undeniable global trend towards higher standards of animal welfare. The proactive, holistic laws of Sweden, Germany, and Italy represent a profound philosophical shift. They move beyond the negative duty of simply preventing cruelty and establish a positive duty to actively promote well-being. The legal recognition of animals as subjects with rights in Italy, the mandate for social contact in Germany, and the detailed environmental requirements in Sweden are milestones in this global movement. Third, these laws showcase a fundamental tension in modern governance between subjective standards and objective enforcement. The vague nuisance laws of Arkansas stand in stark contrast to the hyper-specific, quantified rules of Illinois and the high-tech surveillance of the DNA dragnet. This reflects a broader societal and legal struggle to create rules for social conduct that are both fair and consistently enforceable. Ultimately, the canine codes of our modern world represent a complex three-way conversation between the public's right to peace and safety, a pet owner's right to the companionship of a pet, and the animal's emerging right to a life free from suffering and with its fundamental needs met. These strange laws are the fascinating, revealing, and deeply human artifacts of that negotiation. They show us not only how we regulate our dogs, but how we attempt to regulate ourselves.